Okay, welcome everyone. John and I will be talking about robust project management, the key to successful project completion. Can you go to the next slide? So, good evening, everyone. We are going to start the night off by doing an introduction into project management. One thing I think is interesting is the fact tasks we do in our everyday life can be considered a project. If you think about it, your family decides to make dinner, you have to decide what time you will have dinner, what time to start making it, when each ingredient has to be added, and when the dinner will be ready. You also have to decide what to actually have for dinner, as well as who's doing each task. Okay, now that we have thought about the fact we can use project management, not just in our job, but in our everyday life, let's get started. Tonight, we will go through what a project is, why a project management is important, goals and team, and a project. John, can you switch to the next slide, please? So what is a project? A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or service. Some examples of this could be building a house or delivering COVID injections to different locations. Do some people want to unmute or put in the chat box some projects they have done in the past?
I am monitoring the chat to see if somebody loves Bridget Puppy. Oh, that was me.
Okay, John, do you want to go to the next slide?
Commodity consolidation was the first one that somebody put up.
Okay. Well, thank you for whoever posted that.
And another one too, building a tiki bar in home Reno. All right, now I'll step back and mute myself.
Okay, so a project is a one-time rather than repeated time-phased activities. It produces a unique set of deliverables that meet specific customer requirements and is planned, executed, and controlled through defined methods. John, can you go to the next slide? John.
I'm working on it.
Oh, okay. There we go. So what is project management? Project management is the application of processes, methods, skills, knowledge, and experience to achieve specific project objectives according to the project acceptance criteria with agreed parameters. Project management has final deliverables that are constrained to a finite timescale and budget. Budget is important. Goals help you to prioritize what to focus your efforts on next and assess the weight of your work and those goals overall. John, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, when Olivia started talking about the house, the example of building a house, it occurred to me that maybe an example would be worthwhile. So I threw a quick one together. Here's what the architect designed when someone was building a new house. This is what the customer expected, is this lovely ranch house. What do you think the customer will get without a good project management system in place? I submit to you that what the customer is going to get is something like that. And that's an exaggeration, obviously, but you get the general idea. Olivia?
So now we're going to move on and talk about goals and teams. John, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Goals help you prioritize what to focus your efforts on next and assesses the weight of your work on those goals. Goals can provide the benchmarks to gauge your progress, see the impact of your efforts on the project overall, and establish what other actions you need to take in order to complete the project. John, can you go to the next one? So what are some types of goals? There are many different types of goals you can use within project management. Do some people want to unmute themselves or type in the chat box types of goals they have used?
All right, let's see what comes up. SMART, S-M-A-R-T. SMART goals. I like it.
So thank you guys for participating. Yes, SMART goals are definitely one. So SMART goals is by far the most common approach to defining project goals. SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, meaning that your goal should clearly define what you're aiming to achieve. Measurable, your goal also needs to include an indicator of progress you'll measure the goal's success by. Attainable, you must have the appropriate knowledge, skill, and expertise to achieve it. Results focused, it should focus on results, not actions. And time bound, and you need to specifically specify the timeline you're reaching that goal. Another type of goal is OKR approach. This approach, invented at Intel and used by companies like Google, you define goals by focusing on two factors: objectives, which are broad goals you hope to accomplish, and key results, specific numbers or other outcomes that will signal reaching the objective, the BSQ method. This framework, devised by psychologist David Van Roy, focuses on defining three distinct components for each project: goals, milestones, and deadlines. The acronym BSQ stands for think big, your ultimate goal; act small, milestones and objectives you need to accomplish to complete the goal; and move quick, timeline for achieving each objective. The third type of goal I want to touch upon tonight is ABC goals. The ABC framework focuses on setting goals aligned with your company's vision and mission. ABC stands for achievable, believable, and controllable. In this method, you set goals not only you and your team can achieve, but are also realistic and depend on factors you can control within the business. An example of this is decrease the department's paper waste by 15%. ABC framework focuses on setting what I'd call safe goals, albeit actionable and achievable. These goals never undermine the company's overall vision and rarely help achieve a breakthrough in a business. The fourth and last type of goal I will touch upon is the frame goals. The frame method shares similarities with the SMART framework. So some people if they use SMART a lot, they might also use the frame goals a lot. In this system, you set goals that are few, realistic, agreed, measured, and explicit. John, can you go to the next slide, please? So
what was that again? It was few?
So it was few, realistic, agreed, measured, and explicit.
Okay.
So team composition. The user is also known as the end user, the person who's getting the product and or service at the end. In the instance brought up before, when I talked about making dinner, the user would be whoever is eating the dinner after it is made. John, can you go to the next slide, please? So let's talk about what the duties team members might do or might affect the overall aspect of the project. Project team members are individuals who actively work on one or more phases of the project. They might be in-house staff or external consultants working on a project on a full-time or part-time basis. Team member roles can vary according to each project. It is very important to note that the members from the impacted areas must be important enough to that area so that it actively misses them. If they are not missed, they are not the right people. Meaning, if every department that is affected by the project you will be implementing should have a role in as a team member, at least one representative from that department, because it affects them. An example of that too is I just had in my job something come up where we're implementing a new way of making aircrafts. and someone came up with it and my department didn't have a seat at the table, but it really affects how we do our jobs. And so we're trying to say to them, hold up, there's a different way we should be doing this. And because we weren't part of that team from the very beginning, now it's causing problems. So if you have departments that or customers that really are affected by the outcome, they should be a part of the discussion as well. John, can you go to the next slide, please? So team member duties. Team members' roles can vary according to each project. Project team member duties may include contributing to overall project objectives, completing individual deliverables, providing expertise, working with users to establish and meet business needs, or documenting the process. And team members can have more than one role. John, can you go to the next slide? So second, we will have the executive sponsor, who is ideally a high-ranking member of management. He or she is the visible champion of the project with the management team and is the ultimate decision maker, with final approval on all phases, deliverables, and scope changes. The executive sponsor's duties typically include carry ultimate responsibility for the project, approve all changes to the project scope, provide additional funds for scope changes, and approve project final deliverables. John, can you go to the next one? Thank you. Thirdly and last, the last type of position we'll talk about is the business analyst, which defines the needs and recommends solutions to make an organization better. When part of a project team, they ensure that the project's objectives solve existing problems or enhance performance and add value to the organization. They can also help maximize the value of the project deliverables. Business analyst duties include assisting in defining the project, gathering requirements for business units or users, document technical and business requirements, as well as verify the project deliverables meet the requirements, and finally test solutions to validate objectives. And again, the business analyst could do more than this. This is just some roles that they might do. So, John, do you want to take it away now? Is John muted?
Sometimes the keyboard commands don't work. Anyway, Olivia's talking all of these disparate people who are involved in the team project. And as should come of no surprise to you, they don't automatically all get along just fine with each other. And one of the things that has been shown historically is teams go through 5 different stages in becoming functional as a team. The first one is called forming. This is where the people are named to the team. They're put in a room. They start having conversations about what the team's going to look like. At this point, they may understand their local objectives, i.e. each department, but they don't understand the global objectives, i.e. the project itself. The next part, and not doing this can have a very detrimental effect on the team. It's called starving. And this is generally 2 to 3 weeks in, after the glitter has worn off being on the team, and the people discover in the team that they have different concepts of how the team ought to work and different concepts of what the team ought to, how it ought to function and where it ought to get to. And this is a normal part of team development, and it is necessary for the team to move onward. Next step is norming. Now they've gotten through, they have developed a baseline as to how the team is going to function, and they have developed a common set of goals that they can work after. Then they go on and they actually do the work called performing. And then the last thing a project team does is adjourn. Now, this has been around in the literature on teaming for quite a while. And I will have several examples. I will use one of a merger between two organizations when a team was put together to accomplish the merger, and their ground rule basically was, we won't disagree with each other, and we certainly will never disagree in public, and that one may not be too bad. So they completely eliminated the forming, storming, norming steps and dove right into trying to do the performance. What happened at the end of their work is they had developed a project plan which suited neither of the parties to the merger. So after investing about 18 months, the merger fell apart. And I was witness to some of the beginning and some of the end of it, and quite clearly they had never been through team development process. Now, most of this conversation tonight is going to focus on the front end of putting a project together. For the sake of brevity and on the assumption that nobody wants to be listening to us still at 7:30, we have chopped off the back end and had what is left is getting to the point where you have a detailed enough plan so that you know what the deliverables will be. That's not easy for me to say. And you'll be able to have something concrete to go to senior management with and say, this is what the project entails. There are obviously some life cycle elements to a project, and every project goes through all of these. You have the initiating, which is the original definition of the objectives. Then you have a planning component where you define all of the requirements. You have an execution phase. You have a monitoring and controlling phase. And last but not least, you have a closing phase. And yes, in fact, closing has to be a formalized procedure for any project where you turn over documentation and the parties who are involved say, yes, this meets the goal that we were after, the project is complete. So the first step I mentioned is project initiation. And in order to do that, you develop a description of what the project is going to do. Describes the purpose, history, deliverables, and success indicators. Should be persuasive, since it will be used to secure management approval. And it is subject to progressive elaboration as more and more detail comes up. So this is your first shot. This is the document that you go into if you're doing a capital projects meeting with, where yours is one project vying for the capital resources of your organization. And everybody who is putting in a project has to go before a management council or something like that and present their project and what they want to do. If you get permission out of that to go ahead, then there's some other stuff you do, which I will talk about in a moment. There has to be a project manager for every project, obviously. And that is primarily an interfacing role, whereas the project manager talks daily or weekly with management and the sponsor. Communicates with the stakeholders in the process, which did not happen at Skorsky because the master planning area was left out with that project that Olivia was mentioned. Talks to the project team managers, members themselves, and also talks regularly with functional managers to make sure that the project continues to evolve in a way that will make it useful to the functional areas. And a lot of times you will see what will happen is a matrix management kind of approach where, for the sake of the project, the team will report to the project manager, the requester, or the executive sponsor. But for purposes of correctly stating what their functional areas requirements are, they will also report to the manager who sent them to be part of the team. Project manager's role is to direct, coordinate, and control project work among all of the entities shown here, to communicate upward, laterally, and downward. So next step is developing the project plan. This is more detailed than the original specification that you got approved. It's a document that's approved by upper management for use in executing and controlling a project. It documents assumptions, facilitates communications, and communicates the approved budget and schedule. The documentation of assumptions is critically important because it's in that phase that you talk about what will and will not be done and what assumptions you are based on. Is there a precursor that must be project?
John, I think your audio is cutting out. I don't know if everyone else can hear that.
John, try
No, it's
speaking
breaking up.
again.
He's breaking up. It's hard to
Breaking
do.
Now you're
breaking.
doing better.
Now you're back.
Okay, I moved the microphone up a little. And what will happen is you then need to make sure that all of the predecessor projects that this project depends upon have been completed. Project plan may exist at a summary or detail level. So what does the project plan contain? It contains the scope baseline. This is the original document, which is the project scope statement consisting of deliverables and the objective of the plan. The work breakdown structure, for those of us who have worked in aerospace and defense, WBSs are a common thing. They are not, in my experience, so widely known in commercial manufacturing. But a work breakdown structure is a very handy item because and we will look at this in a minute, it gives you a detailed basis for planning the project, the materials, the resource cost and timing, and for identifying risks. On top of that, you need the project schedule, which may be divided into the same stages that the WBS is broken down into, and a budget, including direct and indirect, to be used to monitor your performance. And note that the project plan, you have the highest ability to alter the cost of the project in the initiating phase. And your ability to alter costs diminishes as you get further on towards completing the project, which is why doing a detailed examination up front is the only thing that will have a chance of making a project completable within time and budget. The WBS is a hierarchical description of the product. Each lower level is more detailed. So you're decomposing one level to the next, Each task is assigned a unique code. Once again, this is obvious, known to anybody who's worked with them. Focuses on deliverables. This is a key point. It is not the work to be done, it's what's to be delivered, and breaking the work down into smaller and smaller packages until you get to a work package. And that has to be sufficient in size to support reliable estimations of the work and can be easily managed. Doing any further decomposition just creates management tasks that are unnecessary. So level one of the WBS is the project itself, and project management reports directly into the project itself. Underneath that, at level two, you will have deliverables or phases or pieces of work, all of which are described as an end purpose, end accomplishment, not how you will get there. And then underneath those, there are lists of tasks or activities subdivided into tasks that roll up to level two. Everything is identified with a number. The work breakdown structure, as I said, is a tool to define a group of project discrete work elements Element may be a product, a data, a service, or any combination. Provides a necessary framework for detailed cost estimating and control. Is dynamic and can be revised and updated as needed by the project manager. Now, sometimes you will find, regardless of how good a job you do in advance, that the world conspires to change the project plan. In one organization I worked for, we were installing a shop floor control system, and we had picked hardware and software vendors who were going to do the data collection portion out on the floor, which fed in fact, to the local software we used to run the floor. And we'd had several questions about the reliability of the software to run the shop, but it had never occurred to us that we'd have a problem with the hardware manufacturer and the middle layer between the individual hardware and the applications. And that's exactly what happened. And it turned out the two middle folks couldn't talk to each other in anything other than snarls and growls. So we sent them away and started over looking for a different solution. And I only bring that up because that's not the kind of thing you can plan for. That is Murphy sticking up their head and saying, you know, that wonderful plan you developed, it's rubbish. Couple of comments. WBS has to include 100% of the deliverables, external, internal, interim, all of the work to be included, including project management. It's one of the most important rules guiding the development of the WBS. 100% of the times, or the summary of the times of the deliverables must be 100% of the parent, must not be more. Obviously, you can understand why, but must not be less, because if it's less, that should say to you, we have overlooked something. And activities in the work package must be 100% of the work required. You can't have the same element in two phases or legs because you are double counting. So there can be no overlap. And once again, it has to be planned outcomes, not planned actions.
John.
Yeah.
Lisa has a comment. WBS creation takes time, but such a great tool to have, especially when outputs are not as defined, non-conformances.
Absolutely. And for those of us who were in the military manufacturing, prime or subcontractors are well aware that DCMA requires a WBS for any project that you're going after. And Larry, if you'd like to say anything, you're welcome to.
Oh, yes. That's what we do all day long, picking up WBSs and CPI, SPIs and EAVs and variances. It's a very complex approach to tracking your planning. It also is very thorough and mathematically supportive, but really it counts, who's ever keeping these WBSs and everything, they really have to be right on the ball to come up with the exact numbers and stuff. And whatever it is, if there's a problem or the successes, they've got to be explicit in the, and it's not easy.
Nope. One other thing you might want to be aware of is the fact that SAP, in fact, has this ability built in to handle WBSs. Now, Olivia was talking about a house earlier, and we saw the design of a house. Here is an example of what a WBS would look like for a house. So you've got over here, you've got all the work inside of the house. So leg 1 is internal. 1.1 is electronics. 1.2 is plumbing. 1.1.1 is roughing in the electrical, et cetera. You've got the foundation, which is major task number 2, which includes 2.1 excavate, 2.2 steel erection. You've got number 3 masonry, our external work, which is masonry or outside of the house, and building finishes. The other thing to note in this example is that each task in the WBS has a percentage of the total work that it is. So we don't know how many hours building the house is, but we know that the work inside the house is 45.6% of the effort to building the house, which is shown right there. And $56,000, we know that doing the foundation work is 24%, another 46,000, and the external work is 30.4%, which adds up to 100, and it's 83,500. It looks like, building up to a total of 215,005 for the budget. And each, if you look at the total for work for masonry, 3.1.1, 2, 3, and 4 will add up to 16.2% of the work. This is the 100% rule, and this is a vision. And you may also have subsidiary documents which will show you the items that are required to support this WBS building this product. So what should the project plan consist of then? It should include the scope baseline, which we talked about, which is the project scope statement of the WBS, the project schedule, which will be based on the WBS. And in fact, the WBS will load fairly nicely into a project management solution like Microsoft Project, for instance, and the project budget. So at this point, we haven't really, well, let me finish what I'm talking about. So at this point, you should have a series of increasingly detailed documents specifying what will and will not be done as part of the project. And I stress the will not be done because that has to be included in the statement of what you're delivering. And the lack of that statement will allow people to come back and say, well, you know, we intended to do this, but you didn't put it in, so you got to add it to the project. Now, obviously, projects change with the development of time, and there's a whole subset called change control and what you have to go through to institute a change to a project. But you shouldn't ever be doing change control based on something that you forgot to state in the project plan you wouldn't be doing. Scope document needs to be signed by at least the sponsor, the requester, the executive in charge, and the project manager. It must be clearly understood that no additional work will be considered under the project without a change process. You cannot be hurried through this. And I will tell you from firsthand experience that about halfway through developing the WBS and the project plan, people are going to start to get antsy about when are you actually going to start doing anything. And you have to be able to say to them, we need to be able to have an accurate and documented roadmap to get to the end of this process, or we're going to have chaos. And it may cost you up to a third to a half of the total project cost to develop this plan, but not doing so will leave you in the same position of Columbus, Christopher Columbus, that is. When he left, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he got back, he didn't know where he'd been. All right. So that is what we have to say for our part of this. This is what we told you about. And in conclusion, having robust project management won't guarantee project success, but not having it will pretty much damn well guarantee project failure. Okay, it's all yours.
Does anyone have any questions?
Maybe just a quick comment or see where it goes here. But one thing I would say too, from a project management standpoint, to the presentation there, where no changes happen without a change control review and approval. The strength of the spine of the person doing the project management is so critical. That person has to be able to say, yes, I understand you have a need. That's not in our project. You need to add it in. Here's how we do it. there's no sneaking things in, there's no scope creep, there's nothing. All too often, those are the things that will start to, I don't know, they just will have adverse impacts to the project. So just noting, great content on it. One of the things I think is having the strong point of sort of the strong person of character that can march to that sometimes they're going to feel overwhelmed by folks asking them to, yeah, but I said this, but I meant this. Can you change this? It's pretty close to what you did say, but it really is the. Those are the things that will. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, those are the things that could bog you down. So
And to
yeah,
add on
job.
what Joe said, I started out as an IT person, although I don't admit that to many people. And I started out in the beginning of IT, 1961. I was 2 at the time. And one of the things that always happened because our project definitions were based on what the user stated in a paragraph or 2, our projects were always late and always cost more than they were supposed to because there was no definitive statement of what you were doing. There was a Jell-O salad that said, this is about what we're going to do.
Yeah.
One thing I notice when I review a lot of WBS is I see a lot of copy and paste of previous entries and slight modifications of what was entered. Some people who have a good handle on it. You can see their style. They've got a lot more expression of identifying their critical paths, problems in front of them. And the thing too is, and when everybody is in the process of putting exact facts out there for people to review, with numbers that are associated with these facts and the hours and times that makes up the WBS and the WB SPs and all the subsidiaries that build up the formulas, to being accurately entering these numbers and have to give good forethought into what you're doing. And it's just, I kind of trying to figure out, when these people are putting this all together, how many of these people are the ones who are running the numbers and know what they're doing, and the other people who run the projects and the managements and the process and the plans and the floor, on the floor, in the engineering room. They got to somehow communicate their situation to the people who know how to run the numbers, and have a good understanding what the whole WBS philosophy is all about, earned value management. And it's I kind of, everybody takes the courses, everybody tries to know what's going on, but I curious as to how well read is this team and doing it all. Like I said, some people, you can read their WBSs and they're pretty good. Some of them, like, where did that come from? Those numbers, do they even correlate? They ask them, and they give me the deer in the headlight looks, like, like I have no idea what the heck you're talking about. And it's one of those things. If you have a good team of people who know what the hell they're doing, fine. But if it's just curious, I mean, it's like anything else out there. Is how well you can do it,
And that's thank you, Larry. That's 2 things that need to be mentioned again. When Olivia said document, document, document. At the front end, you have to document how you got to the point of your completed WBS and what went into creating that document, so that you know where all of the numbers came from, and the mechanics of the WBS ought to support that number too. That's why I said that you have the people who are part of the project team representing the users community have to be important people to the user. because they need to speak with authority. So you can't take the summer intern from finance and put them in there, or things are going to get overlooked. You
And-
can't develop something that's dealing with the master schedule at Sikorsky without Rich McGowan at least being involved in the conversations, because you're going to lose things if you do that. You won't have an accurate representation of what the actual needs are of the user community.
And I think another thing to jump in there and add to the fact is everything needs to be written down, especially in a day and age where we're not all together all the time, right? And where there could be turnover. A project isn't something that necessarily lasts 2 months and you're done, right? Building a house could take 5 years. Projects have different lengths. So you could be managing a site, building property, for example, and you hire a contract team, like a contracting team, and they have their staff, but one of their staffers leave. You need to have everything written down and spelled out in your timeline and spelled out in every aspect. So you know, okay, how much budget is allocated to this? Where along the line are they spending that money? What is it going to? When are they receiving that stuff? Everything. So that everything's traced, you know where everything's going, and that if someone else from that team needs to jump in and take over part of the project, it could be easily done. And if someone needs to look at the project, a higher up, the end user, whoever it might be, could look at the deliverables, look at the paper and say, okay, wow, we're on track. We're doing everything right. Or, hey, there's been scope creep. Okay, this is where it happened. Let's get back to where we're supposed to be. And this is how we get back to it.
I'll tell you one thing. I did an ERP rollout project, and this was done in 3 large phases. Every phase was global, but by the time you got to phase 3, you were still looking at documentation from phase 1. So to your point, Olivia, yeah, everything needs to be written down. The project itself might complete, but I can guarantee you somebody down the road will look at that documentation again, saying, what were the requirements? What were the gaps? How did we fill the gaps? What are the things we want to look under the hood and tune next time? So yeah, the collateral is critical even for future waves. Yeah.
And a great example of what can go wrong if you don't document and don't do this correctly is back in fall of 2016, I was actually taking a project management class at Quinnipiac. And at the time, it had, in the beginning of fall semester, this actual story hit the news in Connecticut. There had been a baseball, like professional baseball field that I don't know if it was for the minor leagues or professional, that was being built in Connecticut. The state money had been going to it. They'd had contractors, all this stuff. They've been working on it for, I think it was like 5 years, a really long time. Basically, they got into the fall of 2016 and it was supposed to be their deadline. And the end user came up to see the finished product and was like, why isn't the field finished? And they started going through things, and it was so noticeable that it wasn't finished. Like everything was kind of made, but you couldn't even walk up the steps of the stadium. They were so crooked because things weren't documented correctly that they literally were going to have to rip apart the stadium they had built because things weren't documented correctly, and there had been scope creep, and start from scratch. And so then it became a whole nother issue of, we're going to bring new people in. This is now going to be sponsored because we spent all this money. And instead of checking along the line, they just allowed people to kind of run with it. And so they had to start from scratch, but they wasted so much money, so much time, just everything. And they had to start from scratch. And Howard actually just wrote in the chat, he remembered what field it was. Dunkin'
That's exactly
Donuts.
what one it is.
Yes, Dunkin' Donuts Park in Hartford was the baseball field. Dunkin' Donuts, I was trying to remember the sponsor. Dunkin' Donuts was the end sponsor that ended up taking over the contract to rebuild the stadium after they tried delivering it and you couldn't even walk up the steps.
And that brings an interesting point. The other half of the project management job that we didn't get to talk about tonight is we talk about that somewhat when you have a conversation about planning mechanism, is putting in checkpoints that say as of this date, we need to be here and this has to be done, number one. Number two, you can't just assume that everybody is going to do the job the way it's supposed to be done. You have to take a look at it. You can't let a project go on autopilot, or you will get things like the Yard Goats Field in Hartford, which was a mess and took another 3-4 years, I think, to get it straightened out, if I remember. And there is a companion half of this if anybody ever wants to see it.
Yeah, we did write it all up, but we didn't want to keep everyone here until
Said we
7:30, 8
realized
o'clock.
it would be 8 o'clock by the time we finished. If we did the whole thing.
And John, you're going to